The mother wound is not a typical term you may hear in a counseling or therapy session, but it may be a factor that is influencing your relationship with partners. While the mother wound is the most often associated with daughters, it is also possible for sons to also have mother wound factors that influence their relationships. The best way to think of the mother wound is a loss or lack of mothering. You know, that nurturing that we often associate with moms. We may not have that when you have a mother wound present. This is typically a deficit in the mother-daughter or mother-son relationships that is passed down generation to generation. And it is often a reflection on how we have experienced parenting and sometimes how we parent. While not a specific diagnosis, it is a way of looking at how current codependency behaviors may be linked to missing elements in the past. So oftentimes children who are raised by alcoholics or drug-addicted mothers or mothers who have mental health conditions, either undiagnosed or untreated, may struggle into their own adulthoods. However, there are also children who are raised by mothers who do not have these challenges. However, they may still provide the physical needs of the kids and even interact with them positively, but simply do not provide that deep love, support, and attention that all children require. They may not have been outright abusive or neglective, but they may have never engaged in the types of relationships that their kids need to help build a tuned in, emotionally balanced person. So today, we'll delve into the emotional world of mother wounds, a topic that intersects with emotional trauma and mental wellness. Some of you may be familiar with our guest today, Ms. Tara Haslip, who was previously on the Melanin Wellness podcast when we discussed shadow work, which is a method of healing that inner childhood trauma, which coincided with her inaugural anthology, Divinity Speaks, Women Who Tune In and Trust Divine Inspiration. And now she's back with her new anthology, Burned. And I am so excited to explore the history, the breakdown, and the root causes of this phenomenon. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again, Miss Tara Haslip. Hi, Tara. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me back. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. I always told you, you guys, you probably don't know if you didn't listen to the episode that I interviewed her on the Melanin Wellness podcast. We vibed on a whole different level. And it was so crazy because I remember when we first started that first interview, I remember I could tell she was kind of holding back and kind of reserved, and then as the interview started to move, you could kind of feel the energy shift and you could feel us kind of meeting on that same frequency. It was actually amazing to watch. I look back at that video all the time. I think that was probably before I had a video pod, but I always kept all the videos of my interviews and I'll go back and look and I can see the moment when it shifted. And that is when I knew that I had to have her on again because there was so much yet to explore. It's funny because we're kind of two sides of the same coin when we talked about a lot of things that she talked about in her journey. So before we begin, y'all, this is something a little new over here at Sage and Melanated. We're going to do us an energy cleanse before we get started. So y'all, I'm about to just light my sage, right? We're lighting the sage because we want to make sure that we are ready to receive with open hearts and open minds all of the information that is going to be delivered in this episode. As I have told you before, your healing is extremely personal, so I nor anyone else can tell you how to do that or exactly what you should do. But what we are hoping is we're hoping that these are tools that you can put in your toolbox, even if you put it in your pen for later, to use you to help to empower yourself and to heal, because that's what this is all about over here, healing and self-discovery and empowerment, right? All right, so we're getting that little energy cleanse. Yes, ma'am. Y'all, I'm literally burning a stage, a stage. It's huge.
There you go. There's the stage.
It is lit. All right. So we have an energy cleanse right now. And something that has always been a staple on my show, no matter what show it was, is also that 30 seconds of gratitude. So to begin, Tara, please bless us.
I would just like your audience to take a few deep breaths, like 3 deep inhales and exhales on your own time, and really fill up those lungs. Exhale. Release any tension you might be feeling in your body, especially in your face, dropping those shoulders. Take another deep inhale. Filling those lungs, expanding that chest, and exhale it out. Melt into the space around you as you get ready to listen to this episode. And one last deep inhale. And final exhale. And as you listen to something like this, honor yourself. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and allow yourself to explore anything that does resonate throughout the coming weeks and days. And if you have a network of people that you like to reach out to talk about these things, reach out to them, have a conversation. If you're not in that space, I always go to journaling. Journal. So I'm really grateful for all of you that are going to be listening to this episode. You're meant to listen to this. You're here for a reason. Take it for what it is and dive in.
I love that. First of all, I just want to give you a nod and say that I'm grateful for you and that breathing exercise, because I'm a huge proponent of those breathing exercises because they can literally disrupt all stress signals. It can stop anxiety in its path. Mm-hmm. It can stop tension in its path. So I am such a huge proponent of that. And so I am so grateful for that breathing exercise. I'm grateful for this platform, the ability to be able to reach people that are like nowhere near us, but still be able to get this knowledge to them. I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for health. Like, there are so many people around me that have been losing loved ones. And we just recently had a friend of the family pass away, and she was younger than myself and my husband. And, you know, it hit me pretty hard when I found out about her. But I am so grateful for health and, you know, being healthy and still being able to be here with my family at this time. All right, y'all. Now, we already know that was more than 30 seconds. But y'all know. Y'all already know. It's always going to be more than 30 seconds. So what? It doesn't matter, because when you are giving gratitude, you can never be grateful enough, because when you are putting that energy of gratitude out, saying, I am grateful for all that I have, big or small, that opens the gateway for more abundance and blessings to come through. So just think about that. All right, y'all. All right. So Tara, fill my audience in on like, y'all, I'm trying to tell y'all, this was y'all. Okay, do me a favor and just spin back just a little bit and give our audience a little bit of a background on you.
Yeah. So just a quick overview. I grew up in a very small rural area as a child, and I'm the product of divorced parents. My parents divorced when I was extremely young. I think it was when I was born. You know, my mom didn't want to know what I was, and then I arrived as a girl. And my mom said, "Okay, we need to change up how we're going to do this. We need a healthy home dynamic." And she felt that, you know, getting a divorce was the best way to do that. And so I had to figure out my voice and who I was between two parents. Plus, that created a rift, not only just between my parents, but also my mom's side of the family. And as I got older, I learned that like both sides, like both my mom and my dad's side of the family, were very like, if you were married, you were not getting divorced. You were just going to stick it through. So that alone was like eye-opening to me as I got older. And I was a pretty vocal kid. I'm a pretty vocal adult. I've learned to, curve it, as growing up does that to you, life experiences in certain situations. And on a professional background, like I wanted to be a dancer my entire life, and that's what I pursued. I went after the very thing that I was in love with. My mom did support that, and she did the best that she could. And then I went off to college for it, and that's when I really had to learn how to find my voice, which was a struggle. Wasn't healthy, did a lot of unhealthy things. And to finally like wake up one day and just kind of go, this isn't working. And I was done with my dance career. I needed a break from it just because of the environment of dance, and it's a very competitive environment, and not having the emotional support that I really craved, but didn't know how to articulate. It wasn't there. So I was very volatile to people around me. I was actually jealous of the family support that they had, and the community that they had supporting them, not from a financial standpoint, but from that, like, they had people to lean on. I mean, it's a grueling environment. I didn't really have many people to talk to. So I started to alienate myself by using my voice in a negative capacity, and then hit my rock bottom and decided, okay, I need to heal. I have no idea what that looks like or what that means. So went back to school, became a paralegal, started the healing process with the book, You Can Heal Your Life. By Lois Hay. Read it cover to cover. I was really, uncomfortable with traditional therapy because that was something that was also a little taboo, but always talked about, but more of like a third person, like, oh, this person needs therapy. They have issues. And I was like, well, I don't want to be seen as having issues. Like, I want to be seen as I've got it together, to then like going down a whole new path. Like I finally stepped into traditional therapy, which turned into holistic therapy. I created my own practice. I found my voice, to now, like, I write books and multi-author books. I'm speaking, public speaking. And if you were to have met me 15 years ago, you would not recognize the person, because I could not articulate my feelings, my emotions, anything that was going on internally, externally. It was just all bottled up, and then it would just explode outward, and it made no sense within the context of what was happening in that moment. So that is a brief overview of me and where I've come from.
It's funny because that's often the way that it is. Like when you are the kind of person that doesn't vocalize themselves and your throat chakra is blocked, you do not verbalize how you feel until it is like a volcanic explosion. And most people are looking at us like, okay, it wasn't that deep. But what you don't understand is that it's got so much more behind it that it ain't really got nothing to do with whatever happened. And I think that that's one of the things that childhood trauma often does to us. So when your parents divorced, what message did that give to you about marriage and commitment and family?
That's a very interesting question for me. I think because I was so young, when it happened, it didn't really resonate because I didn't know a household with two parents. My parents were separated by the time I was 2. And I can honestly remember when my dad would come around, there was tension. And I could feel that as a 2-year-old. And of course, my brother was 7 years older than me. So, I mean, he had a whole life with 2 parents. And then I showed up and it's like everything changed. So there was a little bit of animosity, I'm sure, towards me. Now, my brother and I have a great relationship as adults, but that 7-year age gap and then them separating when he was, very aware and I wasn't, I could just feel the tension and it was very uncomfortable. I think some of it at that age, I kind of wondered, like, what did I do? Type of thing. Like, what was it about me that was this tension? And that's just based on very personal memories that I have with my dad. And I have very few memories with him as a young child around this time. And then as I got older, and then I have to chuckle because my grandparents, who were like the only marital relationship I was ever exposed to, this was my mom's parents, had me thinking like, good golly, I do not want to get married, because they could just pick at each other, and like it would get to the point where they would start cussing at each other, and I was like, oh my God. So the concept of marriage for me when I got older was like, I absolutely do not want to get married unless it is somebody that I 100% vibe with, want to be with. Yeah, it's just all got to be there. But I didn't know what that it thing was. You know, I would be in relationships and I was not emotionally available. So I was dating people who were emotionally unavailable. And then I was getting upset because they weren't available. But I wasn't recognizing my own part in that equation until it was a very toxic relationship, but he was the only one that was like, if you want to have a healthy relationship in your life ever, he's like, you need to go to therapy, because he had been going to therapy and doing a lot of healing. And he was like, you trigger everything that I've worked through. Like, you are the biggest trigger. And I'm like, so why do you keep coming around? You know, but that's when it kind of hit home to me. And I was like, all right, I should like look into traditional therapy. And that's what I did. And it was interesting because I kept trying to, like, I remember being on the call to schedule my first appointment, and I was in the stairwell of my office, and I'm trying to like hide into the corner of the stairwell so tightly, like so that nobody would see me or hear me. Not that there's anybody in there. But I was just so uncomfortable. And the woman who was doing my intake finally asked me, she's like, how are you feeling right now? And I was like taken back because I didn't expect her to ask me that. I said, I'm uncomfortable. She's like, it's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable. And I was like, oh my God, really? You know, and it was in that moment I felt some huge relief because it felt like somebody saw me without seeing me for the first time. And so much of my outbursts, I was hoping somebody would see that like there was more to it than what was in the moment. Just like you said, like, and nobody was seeing it, and I was getting angry about it.
Yeah, it's funny because those things tend to make us more angry. And I told you we lived parallel lives because I never wanted to get married either. Like, it didn't matter what the scenario was. I did not want to get married because I never saw healthy marriages modeled in my life.
Right.
And I was like, I don't want none of that. Like, I'm okay. I was a commitment phobe, and just like you, but I wanted the commitment, but I didn't want it at the same time. It was such an oxymoron, like so uncomfortable. Like, so what role do you feel like your mother won't play in that? Because we're about to start to delve into the book and into your chapter in the book. And y'all, when I tell y'all, when I read this, it literally brought me to tears because it so much mirrored the experience that I had and have had with my own mother. So what role do you think that your relationship with your mother played with the outbursts and the stuffing of the anger and the, like, all of the things that led you to your wall, where it was like, all right, I've run into this wall and I literally can't go any further. And if I don't do something, it's going to do me.
Mm-hmm. It was everything. It was why I shut down. It was why I bottled up my emotions. It was why I was afraid to be me. Yeah, it was all of that. And for the longest time, I was convinced it was a father wound, and it was not. Because of a lot of dialogue between my mother and I. But that's not to say, like, everything that I'm going to share here is not to villainize my mother at all. This also goes back to her own mother wound, which goes back to my grandmother's mother wound. Her mother died when she was only maybe 7 years old, and her father was non-existent. So it's always it's never one generation that it's started with. It goes back and back and back.
Yeah.
But it's one generation that wakes up and goes, this has got to stop.
Yes. Yes.
And I think when my mother decided to get divorced, I think that was her way of recognizing there's a problem here that goes beyond like her marriage. And she made that first step, but I don't think she had the resources or the community available to her. And she was also struggling with, how do I be myself as well? Because that was
Right.
always a negative put onto her by her own mother. So, when I started to flip that script for myself, it was very glaring for her to look at herself. So, and it's taken a number of years to come to a place where my mother is not going to see me the way that I want her to see me. She's going to see me the way that she wants to see me. And that has nothing to do with me.
Yep.
It's everything to do with her. But again, like that has been up until very recently, like the birth of my first child. I had to come to terms with that and just be like, it's not me. I'm a catalyst for something much deeper. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's funny because so many of us just we don't know what we don't know. And of course we didn't know at the time we were experiencing it was called a mother wound. I didn't learn about, honestly, a mother wound until probably about 2 years ago, or about a year and a half ago, when just prior to my grandmother passing, I started to learn what that was. And I started doing more research in it. And it was like light bulbs were flying off all over. I'm sure those light bulbs were crashing and burning on the floor somewhere, because it was like, wait, hold on. That makes sense now. And it honestly made so many things make sense for me. It doesn't, and it's not to, again, this isn't about villainizing anyone, but it's also not dismissing my experience and my truth either. So it helped some things to make sense. And it even to this day, with the status or the non-status of relationship there, it makes perfect sense with some of the things that have been said. And I'm like, I remember a point when it used to just absolutely crush me because I wanted so deeply to have that love. And I had my therapist say, you have to grieve the mother you wish you had, the mother you deserved. You have to grieve that because you don't have that, and you're never going to have that. You have to grieve it and let it go, because if you don't, it will keep you absolutely paralyzed. And she was correct. And that was when I recognized that I had to walk away for my own mental health, for my own well-being. I had to just say, you know what? You might love me, but you don't love me the way I need to be loved. It doesn't feed my soul, so I cannot stay. So in the book, Burned, you talked about being a clairvoyant. Share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah. And it's actually Broken where I talk about the mother wound. Burned is the next book that's going to be coming out the end of December.
Okay.
Which is actually somewhat of a continuation, but it talks about when you go back to shadow work. It talks about everything that I've kind of experienced in the past year. That is like the deep work. So, but Broken is where I talk about the mother wound. And being a clairvoyant is something that is predominant with the women on that side of the family. I don't know if it has to do with like our ancestral roots, which are a combination of many things. Like most Americans were like a hodgepodge of ancestors.
Yeah.
Some of them being on my mom's side as Indigenous and Scottish. Like we can trace it back, both those lines. So like we know the family members that it is that line. My great grandmother was not even a US citizen. She was a Canadian citizen. And that's like the family line left Scotland and went to Canada. So we like know that much. My aunt is very much an intuitive. I am very much, my mom is too. She just doesn't like to, she just likes this. I don't know if it freaks her out because growing up with her sister who could like see things and she would always have to talk her sister through it, that it just is like, she kind of blocks it out a lot, but she is also energetically powerful. Stuff that my husband has witnessed when my mother lived with us. He was like, what is going on? And I was like, she's not happy. And he's like, things falling off the wall, but nothing else breaking. Just weird things going on. And I was like, yeah, no, that's her and I like doing some things out energetically. He's like, is the house haunted? I said, no, it's haunted by us. Like the land is totally fine. So it's been something that's been around for, multiple generations. And I was very aware of it as a kid. I could see things like one of the houses we rented after my parents were divorced. It was a very old farm home. I mean, we're talking, it did not have any duct work. It was that old farmhouse that had a huge boiler in the basement, and it just was supposed to shoot hot air and then it would all rise. But this is Western New York. And in the middle of winter in Western New York, there's no hot air coming out of nothing. So, but it was very old and like from the 1800s. And I would see this little girl and she died. I learned later in life, like in my 20s, talking to somebody who was a medium. She was like, yeah, there was a little girl. She was your age, but she died of pneumonia. In the 1800s in that house. So she was waking you up to play with you. And I was like, I know, it got really annoying. I got tired of being woken up between 2 and 4 in the morning. And I would see her around and I would see other things wandering around. And then, as I became a teenager, you have like all that change in hormones and everything. And it really changed to being when I was asleep is when I would have like all of these downloads and I would wake up and, something would be happening on the news and I would have a dream about the exact same thing happening and I didn't know what to do with the information. So I would just keep it to myself. And that was something that was taught to me too. Like the same thing with my aunt. We just kind of kept things hush hush. Didn't talk about it because it would freak people out. And I'm like, all right, so what do I do with this information? Like what? I'm being told this stuff. What do I do with it? And my mom was just kind of like, well, I don't know. She's trying to explain it to me. But it was basically like, you can try and block it out. Like sometimes it's not necessary to have that information. And I was like, well, how do I block it out? Like, so I had to kind of experiment on my own to figure that out. And some things didn't go so well in trying to figure that out. And then when I was, at the height of my dance career and college education, I just completely cut it off. Like I blocked it out entirely. And then I felt completely lost. I would go to bed and I'd wake up and there would be nothing. I had no dreams. I had nothing. And I was like, does everybody live like this? And I remember asking somebody, I was like, do you like dream at night and like wake up and remember your dreams? And they're like, no, I just close my eyes and wake up for the next day. And I'm like, really? And so that like compounded because I wanted it back with everything that I was experiencing. So since I, started the healing process, that was part of the healing process as well over the last 15 years of like coming to terms with it, allowing it back in. And of course, if, any of your listeners, you have kids, like there is mom intuition and that shit is strong, regardless of whether or not you're tapped in or not. You just know, like, that's your intuition. Yeah. So at the birth of my first son, I mean, it just came back and I was like, oh, I've missed you. And then, I just kept working with it. And then with the birth of my second one, I didn't notice too much of a shift. It was just like, hey-o, it's still there. Like you're still in tune, you're still vibing. But I was more in tune with like his energy and recognizing what was his versus what was mine, because their spirit like kind of wanders in and out and around you while you're pregnant. And he has a very strong personality. Shocker. Like my husband and I are strong personalities. But this one was different. Like, he is very vocal about something in the moment. And I would find myself like with my hormones, and I would just be like, it's my hormones. But like, if my husband would say something that I was like, this is the dumbest thing ever. And I would just like pop off like whatever was on my mind. And I was like, this isn't my energy. And since my youngest being born, like, he's like, I want something and I want it now. And I'm going to scream until I get it. And you're going to give it to me. And then I'll be fine. Like, yeah, kid, we're going to have to work on this. We're going to have to nurture this.
So I noticed also in the book when you wrote about constantly being compared to your grandmother in a negative way. So you said, from my tween to my early teenage years, I spent time helping out around my grandparents' farmhouse in the summer. And as I matured, I started to see my grandmother in a different light compared to how I saw her as a kid. So, what was that dynamic like between you and your mother? Because, I would have thought that because you both have the intuitive, that it would have made you closer instead of causing almost a rift between you.
Yeah. Well, my mom has always kind of blocked it out. So we couldn't connect on that. My grandmother, I look like her. My handwriting is almost exactly the same as hers. My mom will show me recipe cards and I'll go, I didn't write that, but it's my handwriting. She goes, no, it's not. It's your grandmother's handwriting. I mean, exactly the same, like little nuances that I would do with my X's or my T's. And it's like, okay. And like all of us women, you put us on the phone and you try to listen to us and we all sound the exact same. You can't differentiate who we are. But even down to fashion, like I even get dressed and I'm like, oh, I am wearing my grandmother's shoes. I like them. They're comfortable. However, with that being said, I think it was very triggering for my mother because my grandmother's start to life was not the most joyous, right? If anybody reads the chapter, I talk about it. And she had to process a lot of this growing up. And this was a time when therapy was not a thing.
Right.
What happened to her does not happen to kids anymore in the legal system for this very reason, because of the trauma and what it compounds into. She was bounced around because her father was out of the picture. Her mother had a lot of health issues and had passed away by the time she was about 7. She then was kind of bounced around to aunts' homes. So there was no, like, she was with her grandmother for the longest time, but, she'd raised like 7 to 12 kids of her own. So there wasn't a lot of attention given to her at that point, and then moving from one aunt's place to the other. And, it really impacted her. And then she had kids of her own at a young age and a time when it was expected that women get married and have babies. And I don't think that's what my grandmother wanted. There were many times I would listen to her growing up when I would be helping out around the farmhouse, where she would talk to me and she'd be like, I settled for your grandfather. I wanted somebody to wine and dine me. And she would just go off. But from what she was saying, I was just picking up of like, I think she wanted to date more. I think she wanted more freedom. I know like my aunt's husband's mom knew my grandmother from school. And one of the things I remember her saying is that she was always a voice or a cheerleader for the underdog. Like she would always stand up for somebody else. And I was like, oh, I wish I got to know that version of my grandmother, because I am very much like that. Like I'm always standing up for somebody who is being kicked down and trying to see it from a different perspective and trying to be a person they can lean on, a voice of reason, so to speak. And yeah, that's just like her and I 100%. But growing up as a little kid, she was very crabby. I actually dubbed her the crabby grandma. And I wanted to put that in the chapter, but I ran out of like whereas because it's a multi-author book, so you're limited on how many words. But like I as a child, because she was always so unhappy. I dubbed her as the crabby grandma, and my mother had this look of terror on her face and was like, don't ever say that in front of her. I don't want her to get angry with you. Like my mother's own fear of like what happened to her when she was younger. Like, things happened. Hands were raised, and I don't want to talk about my mother's story, but I just know that like things happened, and because it was my grandmother's way of unleashing what she couldn't articulate,
Right.
essentially, and it's not right. And I don't condone it, but that left marks on my mother, and she never raised a hand to either my brother or I because of that. So, I just dubbed her the crabby grandma, and then I started to get to know her because as I got older, because my mother, as I'm trying to figure out how to use my own voice and articulate my own feelings, I kept getting shut down in the way of being told that I was like her in a moment of emotional distress because it was volatile and I didn't know how to use my words properly. So instead of my mother like trying to figure it out, it triggered her, and her response was, "You're so much like your grandmother." And I was like, what do I do with this? Because the only version of my grandmother that I knew was this very unhappy, grumpy woman who didn't have great things to say about anybody. So I was like, holy shit, is this who I am? Like, I don't know what to do with this. So I must be this miserable and nobody's going to like me and I'm going to have to hide who I am. Like, okay. So I just started doing that. I started hiding who I was. I started hiding my emotions. I started to, if I had a personal belief or feeling about something and I tried to share it with my mother, she was very volatile in her response of like, you shouldn't think like that. You shouldn't feel like this. You shouldn't. So I started to like hide my own opinions and viewpoints, especially as a teenager, like how I saw the world around me, getting into politics, especially as I turned 18 and trying to understand like how the world actually works. I kind of catered to her own viewpoint so that it kept things on an even keel. And then, I just couldn't keep it up.
It's so like I'm listening to you talk about this, and it sounds to me as though that maternal wound was passed generation to generation because your grandmother possibly had her own maternal wound that she had been dealing with. And so she just took that. And because she was expected to get married, like once she got pregnant, she was expected to get married, probably by her mother. And so her anger and her rage of not having a voice. And I think that something like that is very common for our ancestors of that era. My grandmother did not have a voice either. And, when she left, she told me I was tired. She told me before she passed, I'm tired. And I know some of the things that my grandmother had gone through. And so I know that she did not have a voice. I know she didn't get the opportunity to just live her life out loud the way she would have wanted to. And so then I think that in some ways that was passed down to my mother, just like you're saying with your mother. You're saying, my mom, she wasn't physically abusive to us. However, it sounds as though that nurturing and that support that you needed growing up wasn't given to you, and you were often muted and told, hey, you're too bossy. What did you say in the book? You're hormonal, emotional, irrational, bossy, and opinionated. Like, and when you're told that as a kid, you're like, okay, so the one person that I want to love me more than anybody is telling me these things. So these things have to be true.
Yeah.
And these are things that I don't think that parents realize, especially moms. Don't get me wrong. Fathers are just as important. But your mother, she is the physical presence that carried your body inside of her body. And so it plants these seeds in your head when the one person who is supposed to love you unconditionally above all others, no matter what you do, if that person does not validate you and doesn't give you that support and say, you can do whatever you set your mind to, I am so proud of you. Yeah, you're bossy, but you know what? Take that boss and someday you gonna be a CEO. Or you know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like you talk too
Mm-hmm.
much, you know what? It's all good. Don't talk in class, but take all that talkativeness and go be a journalist, an award-winning journalist or something. You understand what I'm saying? As
Mm-hmm.
opposed to
Mm-hmm.
trying to mute our voices. And often that throat chakra is often blocked a lot of times from childhood. And we carry that into our adulthood. Like, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, do you feel like that you had that experience? From what you've described, it sounds like it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I couldn't use my voice. It would
Unless
actually,
you were
I would get
screaming,
tense.
probably.
Yeah. And then I was still like, I would feel like the tension in my throat.
Mhm,
And like when somebody would ask me about how I felt and I immediately felt like I was being cut off,
mhm.
it would just, my throat would get tense and I would get louder and I would get tense. And then it just went downhill. I couldn't articulate. And everybody was like giving
Yeah,
me looks as if I was mental. And I'm like, I quit.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I laugh about it
yeah.
now, but it was very frustrating in the moment. And I still kind of work on that, even with my husband. Oddly enough, my husband and I have a very similar relationship to my grandparents. And it has freaked my mother out. And she has said to me, I feel like I'm looking at my grandparents' relation or my parents' relationship again from when I was a kid.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay. Well, I mean, they were the only marital relationship that I had an example to live off of.
Mm,
But one thing I always picked up, like, even though no matter how much they bickered with each other, my grandfather was always by her side.
yeah,
Always.
yeah. It's funny because my husband and I laughed about this the other day. We were talking about that we feel like that the grandparents and great grandparents marriages and relationships, though our ancestors in that era, they would fight like cats and dogs. They would bicker. They would pick after each other. Sometimes there was infidelity. Sometimes there was all kinds of mess going on
Mhm.
in those relationships, but they still stayed together. You looked up and they had been together 40, 50 years.
Yep.
Some of those relationships were probably a little toxic and they probably should have done something different, but they stayed. They believed in staying. So I
Hmm.
imagine now that you're giving that description of your own marriage, that those relationships, those images, and what you saw, what you experienced, that definitely directly influenced,
Hmm.
your marriage. Did your relationship with your mother, how did that influence you as a mother?
Oh, yeah. So I'm constantly trying to be aware. And my oldest son, is me as a boy.
Mm,
And I definitely am trying to figure out how to mother myself when it comes to him.
mm.
And it is a challenge because there are moments where he is me times 10, and I'm like, whoa. I'm so grateful my mother never laid a hand on me. Because there are moments where my son, he's 4 years old, but he is super independent. And I've always been extremely independent. And something that I remember my mom getting so frustrated with me about as a kid was my independence when we lived, like the road we lived on out in the boonies of Western New York is called Ridge Road 104. It's a main back highway that goes straight into Canada.
Mm.
A lot of truckers use it. The biggest fear was me not walking on that road. Like she said, if you're going to go to your friend's house, which was, through a couple cornfields and an orchard, go through the fields. Don't go on the road. And I would say to her, I'm fine. It's okay. There's nothing wrong. She's like, I'm not worried about you. I know you're fine. It's the other people. Like, there's truckers. I don't want you picked up. Like, you get picked up, you're gone. That
Yeah,
was her biggest fear. And I'm
yeah.
finding myself having similar conversations with my oldest where, we'll be out in public and I'm like, hang on to the stroller with your brother and you stay near me. It's fine, mama. It's fine. And I'm like, it is not about you. I'm like, it is
Oh my
about our
goodness.
environment and like being aware. Like, there are cars and people can't see you. You're short. Like, I understand you're super independent, and just trying to articulate this. And like, And he's a Gemini on top of that. So it's like you get the very sweet version of him. And
Yes.
then in 30 seconds, you get this kid running down the hall like, ah, and he just like plows into you and wants to wrestle you and all this stuff. And my husband's like, he's a little psycho. I'm like, he's a Gemini. But I'm hyper aware to it because when I'm exhausted, I haven't had enough sleep, the baby has had me up, and my oldest is being him. I have moments where I'm about to say something and I'm like, ooh, no. I've always said to him, you're allowed to have your emotions. You're allowed to not be happy about what I'm asking you to do, but it's what we need to do right now.
Yeah.
And he usually chills out and does it, but he'll have his moments. He's 4, where he is like, nope, I'm going to fight it. And my anger starts to rise. And I'm a very loud mom. Like, I yell, he yells. It's our personality traits. My husband's like, I'm not going to be able to be around you too when he's a teenager. He's like, I can barely deal with it now. Like, he gets mad, he yells. You get mad, you yell. And you're both yelling at each other. And I'm like, I know. I'm like not shutting him down. Like, I'm trying not to be like, not say the things that my mother said to me. You can't feel this way. You shouldn't feel this way. Or, it just is how it is, kid. Deal with it type of stuff. It's like, how do I continue to have that like nurturing dialogue when I'm exhausted and he is finding every excuse to not lay down and go to bed?
Yeah. I remember those times when my kids were, right now I have a house full of teenagers and then the others are adults. So they're not even in the house. But right now I have a house full of teenagers. And it's funny because I remember telling my best friend before I had any kids, because of my own upbringing and my own mother wound, I remember saying to her, when I become a mom, I'm going to be the best mommy ever. Because while I wasn't 100% sure what to do, I just knew what not to do. So I was like, okay, so everything that was done with me, I'm going to just do the opposite of that, because it's got to be something different, because it's, and so, I don't like, my kids have been so receptive to the way that we've raised them. I was determined that I was not going to create a mother wound within my children, because it affects every aspect of your life. It's affected the way that I am a wife to my husband. It has affected what type of friend I've become. And even there are times where I will catch myself kind of withdrawing from my children, because sometimes it's too much. Sometimes it's too much emotion. Sometimes it's too much touchy-feely, because they're all very, very affectionate. And sometimes it can be too much for those of us who have those mother wounds. And it takes a long time to heal it. Like there's no one magical event that happens in your life to where, okay, boom, it's not there anymore. You will have a mother wound for your entire life. I am in the process of grieving the mother that I wish I had, grieving the grandmother that I wish my children had. And that is a constant thing to deal with. It's not, oh, okay, I just wake up one day and okay, it's just gone. No, because for as long as you're alive, it is going to hurt you when you see other people with their moms, when you see Mother's Day, when you see, all these types of things, they trigger that trauma all over again, that pain. And it's like picking at a wound.
Yep.
So how did you start accepting you for you, right? And healing your mother wound? Like, what steps did you take to say, you know what? Okay, I wish I had this, but I don't. And now this is what I need to do for my own health and well-being.
So honestly, I couldn't even talk about it in therapy for many years. I kept repeating the dialogue that it was a father wound, and it wasn't. But I knew deep down, like as therapy went on, I started to recognize that it was in fact a mother wound, and I didn't know how to face it. When I bought my first home and my mother had offered to help with purchasing it and she moved in, I started to recognize issues that I was like, I think I know why I left and ran away to Philadelphia pretty much, and was very rooted on the fact of like I wasn't going to leave after first semester freshman year when she called me when she was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to pay for this. You're going to have to quit, come home, kid. And I was like, absolutely not. I'm not coming home. I'm not quitting. I'm not leaving. I'm staying here.
Yeah.
And it was when we, had that closeness time that I was like, okay, I've tried to break this bond before. I'm going to need to break it. I'm not quite sure how, because I always ended up back in it. And now I was starting to recognize the pattern. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be brutal when I go to break this. And oddly enough, I met my husband not long after buying my house. And I was like adamant because I'd gotten out of a relationship that was not the greatest. Not that the person was bad. It was just he had mental health issues that he didn't disclose and then had an episode. And I was like, I don't know what I'm dealing with. And I needed time to like just kind of get away from all of that and be by myself to release that alone. But I ended up meeting my husband, and it was, I knew in the moment, like we were supposed to be together, and he was nothing like what I had envisioned. And I remember looking up at the sky going, are you kidding me? Like, he's a country boy from this area that I'm not even from. He likes to go hunting and staying at home, and like, how is he the one? And actually, we are so alike in so many ways. It's not funny. We're both a little introverted, but he can be a little bit more extrovert. Me, it takes me some time to warm up to people. So we're like a perfect blend. And I'm like, okay, I get it now. But that was very triggering. The realization that I was dating somebody and that this was somebody that I was going to marry just set things off. Things got very ugly. And I remember my husband, we were dating at the time, ended up getting into a fight. And I'll never forget it. He looked at me and he said, you can either cater to your mother for the rest of your life and be miserable and end up like her, or you can deal with whatever this is, move on, and we can have a life together. And I was like, holy shit. Like, he saw it in less than a year. Just the things, the behaviors, the things going on, the way she was reacting and responding to things, like, he got it. And he was like, you got to figure this out. Because at this point, I don't want to get married to you if this is what I'm going to deal with. If I have to take a second seat to her, no. I'm not marrying your mother. I'm marrying you. Yeah.
Wow.
So it was that moment. And I went, okay, I have to deal with this. And I have to break this, cut this cord.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Because that is one of the signs that you have a mother wound, is that you're always trying to do better or be perfect in her eyes, because you're attempting to gain her attention, her love, her acceptance. And honestly, like, it is something that is unaccomplishable. Like, I'm just going to keep it a band with you. Like, you will never get that. You'll never get what it is that you're seeking. I can promise you. Again, I've lived this. So I know from experience, no matter what type of job you get, no matter whether you're married and you have an amazing family, it doesn't matter how many accomplishments you have. I have 3 degrees on this wall behind me, and it really did not matter to her. It did not get me that affection, that approval, that connection. It still didn't get it. And so, like, hats off to your husband, and mine too, because I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't even know how my husband deal with me. So, but he was able to see you when you couldn't see yourself, and he helped be the catalyst for you to start making those changes. Because, I mean, I don't know about for you, but I know that making those changes are very painful. Very painful.
Yeah. There were so many times where I felt like I was the problem, and, trying to combat that and being like, no, let's reason, let's be rational. And like, when it came down to the housing situation and like our future forward, we wanted to have kids. And, it got to the point where my my husband was like, I don't know how you're doing this. I'm like, if I don't act calm and collected about all of this, she's going to turn around and tell me that I'm irrational.
Yeah.
And it was already happening anyway. Like, planning the wedding was, I did a traditional wedding, but that's not really what I wanted. It was more for my husband because his sister and I are very similar in that way. He's like, my sister's not going to have a traditional wedding. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm like her. Like, she's like me. I don't want a traditional wedding. But I did it for them. And I would try to have like my mom part of the conversation, or she would ask me something. And then all of a sudden she'd start scrolling on her phone and just completely ignore me while I was talking. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to sit here and talk to you if you're not interested. And I would walk away. And then at one point she was talking to somebody. She's like, yeah, Tara's being a total bridezilla. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm
like, what?
the most like, all I'm trying to do is figure out how to pay for this. And I don't even care, like it just got to the point where I was like, look, dude, I don't care. I don't care about my dress. I don't care about the venue. I don't care about the food. Like, let's just get married and get it over with, because all I'm seeing is a lot of shit that I don't want to deal with. Like, I told my husband since, I'm like, at our 10-year wedding anniversary, we're going to go away and actually have a honeymoon and renew our vows. No kids, just maybe one or two of our bestest friends. And that is it. We're going to get, I'm going to get the pictures I want. I'm going to get, what I wanted, I'm going to do then. But yeah, like, so I had to be calm and collected about the selling of the house. Cause I was like, look, if you don't want to, and my husband outright asked, do you want to be here when we have kids? And she said, absolutely not. And I said, okay, well, the only thing I could think to do, because my work was taking me elsewhere outside of the county we were living in, I was like, well, I think the only thing to do is just sell the house and cut our losses. But she was on the mortgage with me. Wow. So it was a whole thing. Yes. It was a whole thing. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
I can imagine. I can only imagine.
And I still get, if only you would cut that house. And I'm like, I'm not going there. I'm not going there.
So what is your relationship with your mom like today? Is it any different? Has it gotten any better since you started to do your work?
I've had to set my boundaries and stick to my boundaries.
Yeah.
And when I don't, my husband can tell I've been around her too much. And oddly enough, I'm starting to notice similarities with my oldest when he's been around her, that I'm like, ooh, we're going to have to limit this time. And I'm not sure how to do it, because she loves her grandbabies, and she does see a lot of me in my oldest. My concern with that is that she, might say the things that I grew up with, and I don't want him experiencing that.
Right.
But that's his Oma, and he has a great time with her. And until it becomes something that I'm like, enough, we'll set stronger boundaries. But for now, it's just kind of like a behavioral thing. And I don't know if it's because like he gets free reign and gets to do whatever he wants over there. That's where the attitude is coming from. Because he walks up in her place, goes right to the fridge, sets himself up with his toys. And she's like, he can do what he wants. And I'm like, okay.
Like, that was so not what I grew up with.
Right. Don't put your hands on the wall. Clean this up. Like, everything's got to be neat and in order. And he's got everything just out and all over the place. But I've had to stick to my boundaries. And it was tough up until my first was born. I mean, I really didn't let her come around much. But then when my first was born, my husband was still working in Louisiana and we were in Virginia. So I was a single first time mom for first 5 months of my oldest life. So my mom ended up being my sounding board. And that was the hardest part of like trying to keep it together and also trying not to have a postpartum experience where she could kind of, say to me like, oh, you're just like your grandmother, because I wasn't going to tolerate it. I knew I was going to blow up at that point. And I think there was still a little bit of proving, like, I'm not exactly like her. because I know like I was trying not to have like insane postpartum, but I did have a lot of anxiety after my firstborn. And oddly enough, she did come back and say one time, like, oh, you did very well postpartum. I'm surprised. And I was like, okay, great. But yeah, I've since like strengthened those boundaries, especially since we've kind of moved further away from her. And I've always wanted to make sure that like I'm not leaning on her and calling on her. You know, it's the mom. It's your mom. Like you always wanted to call your mom.
Yeah.
You always want to, you know,
Yes.
get that kind of emotional support that you are looking for. And I have to remind myself,
Yes.
like, I'm not going to get what I'm looking for. I'm not going to get what I'm looking
Exactly.
for. Like she can be a sounding board, but I have to be aware that like, if I'm looking for something specifically, that's not what it's going to be. So it is better as long as the boundaries stay in place.
Right. Right. Because again, it, like I said earlier, like y'all, when I tell y'all this mother wound thing is not there's no magical time in which it stops hurting, because it never stops hurting. There's no magical time in which you're all good and you go on. You just make a choice to choose yourself and to choose your own well-being, because it is a toxic type of push and pull. And, you know, I've heard so many people be like, oh, well, you know, I think that people should love and respect their mothers no matter what. And I'm like, excuse me, say what? Like, let's be clear. Listen, you know, I that has not been my experience. And I think that people are starting to understand that people's experiences are different now, and you can't just throw a blanket over something and say, oh, regardless. Because one of the things that stood out to me the most from my therapist was last year when she said to me, we need to normalize not accepting trauma and abuse from anybody, regardless of the relationship. And I could not agree more. She was like, you don't have to put up with people emotionally abusing you because you want that love and acceptance from them and they don't want to give it. Or they'll dangle it in your face and then they'll pull you in enough just to stab you all over again. Like, we're not going to keep doing that. Like, we're not going to keep doing that. And I come from the era of, oh, well, regardless, that's your family, that's this, that's that. But when my therapist said that to me, and I really sat back and thought about it, and I was like, this ain't healthy for me.
Right.
And I realized that my entire life changed when I let go. When I let go and began to grieve the loss of what I wish I had and accept what I really have, my life completely changed for the better. Because I was no longer chasing something that was unattainable. And so many of us, especially us ladies, we do this so much. We all feel like we're supposed to have our moms. All of us feel that way. And like my best friend, she lost her mother when she was about 16. She was a teenager. And I remember she used to say to me, girl, I would give anything just to have one more conversation with my mom. And it took her, oh my God, I want to say we've been friends for almost 30 years. It took her probably 20 of those years to really get why I'm like, girl, your relationship that you had with your mom is not the one that I've had. So me stepping back and protecting my peace, protecting my mental health so that I can be the best mom to my kids and be a better wife to my husband. If that's what I need to do, then that's what I'm going to do. And it took her, honestly, it took her about 20 years before she really understood. She bared witness to a lot of the things that happened between me and my mother, and a lot of things that were done to me, and hurtful things that were said to me. And she would watch, and she was there to pick up the pieces when I was falling apart and didn't know what to do. And it took her this many years to finally say, you know what? You're right on this one, because nobody should have to accept that.
Yeah. And I love what you say about strengthening your relationship with for your kids and being there for them by honoring your peace, because that's something I've noticed between like my husband and I. I lean on him more as my sounding
Mm,
board when I need something, which allows us to have more open conversations
mm-hmm.
and figuring out what we need to do. Like, we've been through a lot of shit together. I can't imagine going through it
Yeah.
with anybody else that I've ever dated.
Yeah.
And that also strengthens my relationship with my kids. And trying to show up and mother myself through my oldest son, and then like experiencing, like, my youngest is going through a lot of not health issues, but like I was very colicky as a baby, and I think I probably had what they would call GERD. It was
Mm,
really bad. Um, and my youngest has it, so that's why he's not sleeping very well. And it's like, I'm learning to mother him the way that I wanted to mother myself. And I still find myself
mhm.
like saying things. I'm like, oh God, don't say this, Tara, because I've heard nothing but horror stories about me as a baby, going through all
Yeah.
that and how I screamed and I was miserable. And I was like, I was uncomfortable. And like, as soon as I would get comfortable, somebody would want to come and be like, oh, look at the cute baby, and like pick me up. And it's like, that's the worst thing you could do, So
Yeah.
like being around my youngest and recognizing when he's in pain and just being like, what can I do for you? And
Yeah.
I've had moments just because I'm super exhausted, and then I get hard on myself because I found myself like, oh my God, you're so miserable. And I'm like, he's not miserable. He's uncomfortable. There's a difference. And like
Yeah.
having to remind myself of that. Um,
Yeah.
so there's been a lot of learning that I've been going through just with this latest postpartum, and like watching what I say and learning from what I'm saying and like changing the
Mm,
dialogue in my head and being like, okay, it is a whole different ballgame with two kids. And I've had two boys, and something that I want to really make sure of is that they don't have a mother wound with me, because I
mhm.
want them to be strong men, to be able to show up for their partners
Right.
and
Right.
not be emotionally stunted.
Yeah. Yeah. And the interesting dynamic for me is that I have two daughters. So out of the six kids that I have two daughters. And so it's a constant work in progress for me to be mindful of the things that I am saying when it comes to my daughters, because in so many ways, because of all that I've been through, I expect my daughters to be able to handle things the way I handle things, to be able
Mm-hmm.
to say, all right, this is it. Okay. This is the problem. Oh, well, this is what we're about to do about it, and just take action. I've always been that kind of a person, but I think that it came from my mother wound. Me not
Mm-hmm.
getting what I needed made me so hyper independent, to the point to where,
Yeah.
like, I am the shortest person in my house, okay? And like, I post stuff on social media all the time about my family pushing the the damn detergent all the way to the wall. And I'm like, y'all know I can't reach that without a step stool. Like, what you doing? I'm like, y'all, this isn't right. But my husband could literally be standing right there, and I'll go get a chair and stand on the chair to go and get it. And he's like, are you for real right now? Like,
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
it takes a lot of work. It takes so much work, and it is a constant work in progress, because I don't want my daughters to grow up having a mother wound. I want my kids, all of them, but especially my daughters, because the relationships with my sons is a whole different.
Oh yeah.
It's almost like I can't even describe. It's almost like a romance or something. It's so hard to describe the relationship
No,
between a mother and a son, but it is just, oh my God, those boys just have oh my God.
yeah,
Now
I get it.
my daughters, it's a constant, my girls, I love them. And I always want to be the first phone call they make. If anything goes wrong,
Mm-hmm.
I can call my mom. I don't care how bad it is. I don't care what I did. I don't care. She gonna help me in the moment, but later she gonna tell me, okay, you shouldn't have did that, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I know my mom is going to be there if I call her. It don't matter the day. It don't matter the time. And that's what I'm trying to establish. And it is tough. It is tough, because oftentimes our girls are so much like us that it's like, like, oh my God. Especially my oldest. My oldest girl is 26. So she's
Mm.
about to turn 26. She'll be 26 next month. Oh my God. That girl drives me absolutely up a wall, but I love her to no end. And if she calls me, as long as it's within my power, mama is coming. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
My youngest daughter, she's been babied so much. So she drives me up an absolute wall. Oh my God. Cause it's just like, girl, when you come, stop crying. Stop it. I don't do that. Like, stop.
Right.
But she's the baby girl.
Mm-hmm.
And she's surrounded by all these brothers. And she has this dynamic of everybody saves me. Everybody does everything for me. And it is a whole different
Yeah.
dynamic. But yes. So tell everybody about this new book. Like, okay, because like you literally just gave me Broken, like in October, and now you're
Right.
talking about December, a whole nother one's coming out. Like, I'm not even ready, y'all. Like, I was
Yeah.
not prepared for this one.
Yeah, so this is actually a series. So it's Betrayed, Broken, and then Burned. And I've written and Broken and I've wrote and Burned. And
Okay.
Burn is launching at the end. I believe my publisher said they're doing it this month. And I'm like, it's such a crazy time of year. Like I
Yes.
have a hard time focusing. And then something
Yes.
pulls me away that has to do with the holidays. So I'm like, so I don't have an actual launch date to share with your audience right now, but it is going to be this month as far as I know.
Okay.
But this one is called Burned, and it's about women finding their voice and when they have gone through something like very, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say traumatic, but it's, depending on the story, life-changing. Yeah. And they had to find their voice. And my chapter really talks about this past year and a half and everything that myself and my family have gone through. And I know you touched on earlier in the show, our previous podcast episode talking about shadow work, and
Yes,
Lord, everything that has happened, everything that has gone on in the past almost 2 years now has been the pivotal moment of truth to everything that I've been practicing in my own like shadow work and mindfulness practice. It was put to the test. And I had to trust the process that we were going through and go through the fire. I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah, of course
but yeah, I had to go through that fire. And what scared me to death was the fact that like I had a husband and 2 kids. Like I was pregnant with my second while going through this, and like we're all going through this fire. To now come out the other side, and I kind of left the chapter open-ended. There's no like definitive because it's still unfolding. So I'm hoping that this kind of leads to maybe a mini book, that a mini solo book that I do for myself.
Nice.
I don't know if that's going to be in the coming year. I think I'm going to give book writing a break for 2024 and maybe look at 2025 for a solo book.
Yeah.
To really talk about how everything kind of unfolded, because it's coming full circle. Which is really interesting to see. And I'm just like, oh, thank God. Let's see how this is going to unfold. And I'm like on the path. Like I am exactly where I've been wanting to be for years, but I had to go through all of this hell and shit fire to get to this point. And I had to trust the process. And it was a challenge to trust it while pregnant. And a lot of the opinions of others being like, you should do this, you should do that, you should do the other thing. And like really trying to stay grounded and rooted in my intuition, be like, no, I think I'm supposed to do this. And I'm going to go with it, to have it come like whoop, full circle.
Yeah. It's funny. I've heard that writing a book is such a labor of love. I've heard that it is such a humongous undertaking. Yeah, so like I have, there'll be a book coming out by myself in 2024. Yeah. I have not set my release date yet. There are so many things about this book that I have not quite pulled together yet, but it will definitely be coming out in 2024. And we'll be honest with you, part of me is sitting here like, okay, wait, do I really want to do this? It's a whole situation. And it started out with me being a part of an anthology, and then it was like, no, your story needs to have its own platform like by itself. It's too strong. It's too powerful to be put in just this one chapter. So it's going to be a whole book, and we're going to see how this thing turn out. I will definitely keep y'all updated as to how that's going to work out, because listen, I am, and I can so relate to what you said when you said, I am right where I've always dreamed of being. Like, and I tell people this all the time, the life I'm currently living, I manifested this shit.
Oh yeah.
I manifested every single piece of it. And like, I ain't going back.
Right.
Like I it's scary. The life I live right now is so big and it's super scary, but I am having the time of my life, y'all. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you follow me on social media, you see I am having the absolute time of my life.
Oh yeah, I'm liking all your stuff all the time. I'm like, dang, this is the level I'm trying to get to.
It is so funny how, and that goes back to that piece of gratitude that I talked about earlier in the show. I started a practice of gratitude, daily gratitude, in October of 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And what I would do is, before I ever let my feet touch the ground, I say 3 things I'm grateful for. Now, mind you, them 3 things got to come real fast, because I got to go to the bathroom when I first wake
Right.
up. So,
Truth.
3 things have to come real quick. But I do that because it starts my day off right. It really does. Because even if you're just like, I'm just grateful for opening my eyes, I'm grateful for being able to breathe, I'm grateful for being able to actually get up and walk from my bedroom to my bathroom. Because there are so many people who can't do that. That might seem simplistic, but I did it. And I've done it every single day. Now, of course, I come back and do more gratitude later after I've gotten my bathroom out of the way. But that practice of gratitude, consistently putting it out into the atmosphere, consistently putting it into the universe, it brought to me exactly what I manifested. It opened up all those gates to allow all the things that I have wanted and dreamt of to come true. Right. And I'm in fire hose syndrome mode right now. Like, it's just, and I'm just like, okay, I can't breathe right now, but it's going to be okay. I'm going to put on a scuba mask or something, and we're going to keep this thing going. But I can't say how much that is the truth. So if you want to see yourself living your greatest dreams come true, the most abundant life that you've ever had, I'm telling you, while you're doing your shadow work, like, let's be clear, please understand that shadow work is not a beat up on you session. A lot of people mistake that. Please understand that's not what it is. Your shadow work is simply you seeing you've got a light side, you've got a dark side. We all have it. Embrace it and say, okay, this is what happened to me. However, this is what I did. Probably wasn't right, but this is what I did as a result. And I could have done something different. Accepting that, owning your own problematicness is going to be a pathway to healing. So y'all, the actual book, the one that's out right now, not the one that's coming out.
The one that's out right now is Broken.
It's called Broken: Women Breaking Ancestral Chains and Generational Cycles to Create a Brighter Future for Themselves and Their Families. Like, I'm telling you, it is a powerful read, y'all. If y'all are on a journey of self-discovery, on a journey of empowerment and healing, this is a definite must-have for your personal library, because the stories in there were very moving. They were powerful. Had to walk away from it for a little bit to catch my breath. Because it'll trigger you. I'm going to tell you that right now. It will trigger you. But it will trigger you in a way that invokes healing. That invokes empowerment for you to have your own voice and understand that, hey, I can speak up for myself. You don't have to be nasty. You don't have to be mean about it. You can speak up and speak your truth without hurting anyone, because that's never our intention. Our healing is not to hurt other people. Our healing is for our own health and well-being and our own happiness. You got any last words for the audience?
I would just say that it's been a pleasure having this conversation with all of you. And I would love to connect with anybody who is feeling like you want to talk to me, you want to connect with me. You can always reach out to me through Instagram. You can follow me there at grounded_energy111. 111 is what I say. And join the community of women. Like, that is going to be my biggest focus for 2024, is building the internal community, like bringing us together to find our voices, build our strengths. So if you feel called and you resonate with anything that I've shared here, anything that you connect with through the book, you can download it. It's through Kindle right now. There will be a hard copy, but you can download it through Amazon. And if you resonate with anything I've shared there, connect with me, please. Like, reach out to me, find me on Instagram, send me a DM, join the community. It's a free community, and it's about empowering all of you.
That's awesome. Yeah, get in the community, guys. If you're feeling, especially if you're feeling alone, because I remember you touched on this briefly earlier in the episode when you said, sometimes you don't have that support, you don't have that community to support you in your healing and say, hey, yeah, this is okay. You're on the right path. Go forward with it. So sometimes we don't have that, especially those of us who have mother wounds. Sometimes we do not have that support and that lifeline to realize you are not alone in this. You are not the only person suffering from this. It's a whole army full of us, unfortunately. I wish I was not a part of said army.
Right.
But there is an army of us who have this mother wound. However, we are both living, breathing examples that you can persevere. You can carry on. You can become an amazing, badass woman in spite of all of that hurt and pain, and go on to create an amazing legacy and break those generational traumas on your own.
Absolutely.
Y'all, this was an amazing episode as usual. I appreciate you so much from the bottom of my heart for coming back onto the show to talk about something completely different and, riding with me through the change, because, girl, there has been a lot of changes since you were on the show the first time. So I appreciate you. You have become a virtual friend from far away.
Yes. Yes.
And I appreciate you so much for coming on and sharing with the audience. Thank you for telling your story.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. And I truly appreciate you and our connection.
Me too. So thank you all for joining us on this healing journey. Until next time, stay curious, stay open-minded, and keep healing, y'all.